Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this final session in the Cheshire West and Chester Social Value series. Today, we're looking at delivering social value after contract award. My name is Gillian Askew. I'm one of three co-founding directors of an organisation called Go for Growth. If you're not familiar with Go for Growth, we're a social enterprise dedicated to helping other VCSE, voluntary sector, community, social enterprise, third sector organisations, or smaller businesses to find opportunities and secure sustainable growth in primarily the public sector, but also in private sector. As always, I'll just do a little bit of housekeeping. We are on Zoom again today. We've got a lot to try and cover today, so it will be a bit of a canter through stuff. So if anybody wants to have a more in-depth conversation about delivery after contract award, please do get in touch afterwards. We are recording the session and a copy of the recording and the slides will be sent out to all registered attendees, usually within about 48 hours of the session this morning. Hopefully by the end of the session today, everyone that's here will have a better understanding of what happens after contract award, recognise how social value commitments become part of that contract delivery, understand how social value is monitored, learn how to evidence impact and feel confident in embedding social value into everyday operations rather than treating it as an additional task. And if you've been around for the whole series, you'll know that over the last few weeks, we've looked at social value from a number of different perspectives. So we've explored what it is, how to write it, how buyers evaluate it. And today we're going to look at what happens after you've been successful. Because what we know, of course, is that winning the contract isn't actually the finish line. That's just the beginning. And so one of the things I'd really like you to take away from today is this. The strongest social value commitments aren't the ones that win tenders. They're the ones that are actually delivered. Social value is about what difference we make, what impact we make, what changed as a result. And it's actually where trust is built, it's where relationships grow, and it's where reputations are made. So let's have a look at what we'll cover in today's session. So today's session is really about turning promises into reality. So we'll look at what happens after contract award, why delivery and accountability matter, how social value is monitored and some of the challenges that we might face in contract delivery, and how to demonstrate the impact that you've created. One of the things that I hope you'll notice throughout today's session is none of this is about ticking boxes. It's about making sure that the commitments that we've made genuinely benefit not just your organisation or your customer, but also the community. And before we move forward, let's quickly reflect on the journey that we've been on. So, what this session today is trying to do is bring this whole series together. So in session one, we explored what social value is. Hopefully out of that session, if you were at it, you realise that your organisation probably creates much more social value than you first thought. In session two, we looked at how to communicate that value within tenders. Then in session three, we sat on the other side of the table and we started thinking like evaluators and how we can make that evaluation journey as easy as possible to create confidence in the evaluator. And today we're completing that picture. So after all that preparation, the writing, the evaluation, the award, that's when the real work begins. Social value moves from being that promise on paper to something that actually changes people's lives. So what actually changes once you've won the contract? Once the contract starts, your social value commitments stop being something you wrote to help win the work and they become part of what you've now agreed to deliver. And that's a really important shift. At tender stage, social value can sometimes feel quite separate from the main service. It might sit in its own response box, its own themes, outcomes and measures, the TOM schedule, or even in its own method statement. But after award, it should start to sit alongside normal contract delivery. Excuse me. So, for example, if you committed to creating 2 local employment opportunities, that commitment should become part of your mobilisation and workforce planning. If you committed to using local suppliers, that should feed into how you manage your purchasing and your supply chain. If you committed to reducing waste or carbon, that should become part of your operational approach rather than something you only revisit when a report is due. The important point is that social value moves from promise to delivery and then to evidence. A contracting authority might monitor your social value and whole contract performance through formal key performance indicators, KPIs, or through contract management meetings or delivery plans or reporting templates. Sometimes it might be really structured, sometimes it might be lighter touch. But even when the authority doesn't appear to be asking for much evidence, that doesn't mean that your commitment disappears. It's still something that you said you would do. And that's why it's so important not to overpromise during the tender. It can be tempting to put forward the biggest possible offer because you think it will score better. But once the contract award is awarded, you are legally obliged, contractually obliged to deliver it, and somebody has to deliver it. And quite often, and not always, especially in smaller businesses, but sometimes the person delivering the contract was not necessarily the same person who wrote the bid. And that can sometimes be where problems can start. An operational team might discover that the business committed to apprenticeships, volunteering hours, local spend, carbon reporting, without properly checking whether those things were realistic. So one of the best habits you can build is involving delivery colleagues before you submit the tender. Make sure that whoever needs to understand what's being promised is confident that they can make it happen. Imagine then, as a practical example, that you're a small cleaning company and you've committed to offering 2 paid work placements during the first year of contract. That sounds straightforward. But after the award, the company needs to decide who will manage those placements, what tasks will participants do, who will supervise them, will there be any additional cost or checks or insurance needed, which local organisation will help recruit those participants, when will the placements happen, how will success be recorded. The commitment itself might only have taken 1 sentence in the tender, but delivering it requires proper planning. And you should understand that at tender stage. So the key message, I guess, is that winning the contract doesn't mean that social value is finished. It means that social value delivery actually begins. So how do we turn those promises into something that can actually be delivered and evidenced? So this slide gives us a very simple sequence. We need to deliver what was promised. We need to track progress. We need to evidence outcomes, build trust and credibility. And all of that, of course, sounds obvious, but every step matters. So let's start with delivery. The first thing to do after award is to make sure that the commitments are clearly understood internally. Don't leave them sitting inside the tender response. Pull them out, create a list, record what was promised, how much was promised, when should it be delivered, who is responsible, what evidence will be needed. And that alone can help prevent a lot of delivery issues. The next stage, of course, is tracking. We don't want to wait until the end of the year to try and remember what happened. We need to track delivery as we go. So if you committed to volunteering hours, record them every month. If you committed to local spend, make sure finance can identify the relevant suppliers. If you're committed to employment outcomes, record recruitment dates, roles, postcodes where appropriate, and of course lawful to capture that information. Then there is the evidence. Evidence isn't just about proving that an activity took place. It's also about showing what difference it made. So a sign-in sheet, for example, might prove that 10 people attended a workshop, but feedback, outcomes and case studies tell the buyer whether the workshop was useful. And that's where impact really starts to come through. And finally, when we're building trust, it comes from when a supplier does what we said we would do, when we communicate clearly and we provide reliable information. And that trust can honestly make contract management much easier. And it can also make a real difference when future opportunities arise. So, for example, imagine you committed to 50 hours of staff volunteering. A less strong approach, a weaker approach, would be to wait until month 11 and then ask everyone in the organisation whether they happen to volunteer anywhere and hope that they can remember if they did, where they did and for how long. But a better approach, a stronger approach, would be to identify suitable community partners at the beginning of the contract, plan volunteering opportunities across the year and record attendance and outcomes as they happen. You might then be able to report actually more hours that have been delivered, how many employees have been involved, which local organisations were supported. For example, a community garden was restored, and that can tell a much more complete story, not just for this contract, but for future contracts that you are potentially bidding for. And remember, a good contract manager is not necessarily looking for a glossy report full of marketing language. What they really want is confidence that the information is accurate, that the contract that was let is what's being delivered. Simple, consistent evidence is often better than something elaborate that can't be verified. So let's not treat reporting as the last step. We should build evidence collection into delivery from day one. And there's a very good reason why that matters, because every successful delivery affects much more than this one contract. So there are two sides to this slide. Firstly, what can happen when commitments are not delivered? And secondly, what can happen when they're delivered really well? So let's start with non-delivery. If a supplier repeatedly fails to deliver its social value commitments, that can affect overall contract performance. The exact consequences of that, of course, will depend on the contract itself. It might result in a challenge during contract meetings. It might lead to an improvement plan. It may affect supplier performance records. And in more serious cases, it could contribute to wider contractual concerns or even breach of contract. And it can also, of course, damage reputation. Public sector organisations do network, they do talk to each other. And in some cases, when the contract value is high enough, over 5 million, those key performance indicators and the performance thereof could be in the public domain. A reputation for making ambitious promises and then failing to deliver is not something any supplier wants. And it could also affect future bidding opportunities. Excuse me. For example, you might be asked for examples of previous social value delivery. You might want to use the contract as a case study. You might be asked to provide references. If delivery's been weak, it becomes much harder to demonstrate your credibility. But the positive side of that is that actually strong delivery strengthens those relationships. A customer's much more likely to trust a supplier that keeps commitments, provides clear evidence, and raises any issues early. It also creates real impact, and that's really worth emphasising. This isn't just about contract performance. If you create a job, support a local charity, reduce carbon, or help someone gain a qualification, that's a real outcome for a real person or a real community. And strong delivery will always give you great evidence for future tenders, because you're no longer saying, we plan to do this. You can say, we have done this. Here is the evidence and here's what's changed. And that can be so powerful. So an example of that, imagine two suppliers both bid for a future contract. Supplier A says, we will work with local schools to provide career support. Supplier B, however, says, on our current contract, we delivered 6 career sessions across 3 local schools, reaching 180 pupils. 92% of pupils said they had a better understanding of local career opportunities. All of a sudden, supplier B sounds more credible because it can demonstrate that successful delivery. Past performers will not always be scored directly, but it can strengthen the evidence behind your method. So even if you were new to the market, rather than saying we'll work with local schools to provide career support, if you said we will deliver 6 career sessions across 3 local schools, reaching a target cohort of 180 pupils, and we aim to get feedback from attendees of upwards of 90% to say that they now have a better understanding of local career opportunities, you can shift that into future tense and make it just as powerful. And it will give, either way, evaluators more confidence that the commitment is not just an idea. So good delivery today can become evidence for tomorrow. So how will the contracting authority normally keep track of whether those commitments are being delivered? Well, there's no one single approach used by every contracting authority. Some organisations have very mature social value reporting systems. Others are still very much developing their approach. But most will use some combination of the 4 things that are shown on this slide. So the first is contract management meetings. Social value may well appear as a standing agenda item, and you might be asked to provide an update on progress, any issues and what's planned next. And that doesn't have to be a complicated reporting environment. A short, honest update is often enough, provided it's supported by evidence. The second is key performance indicators. or performance measures. So they might include numerical commitments as number of jobs created, number of apprenticeships, hours of volunteering, percentage of local spend, tons of carbon reduced, etc. The key is understanding exactly how the measure is defined. For example, what does local mean? Is there a particular postcode area, a wider region? What counts as a new job? What evidence is required? Try not to make assumptions, always check. The third is a delivery plan. This might be agreed during mobilisation. It might be part of the tender submission to set out when each commitment will happen, who's responsible and how it will be evidenced. A good delivery plan helps both the supplier and the customer because it turns broad promises into practical actions. And the fourth is regular reporting. The frequency will vary. It might be monthly, quarterly, 6-monthly, or annually. Some buyers will provide a template or an online portal. Others might ask for a written update. The most important thing is to understand the reporting requirement early. Don't discover at the end of the year that you're expected to report information that you haven't collected. So at any mobilisation meeting or initial contract review meeting, you can ask, what do you want us to report? How often? In what format? What evidence will you accept? Who should receive it? If that isn't clear already from the tender, a short conversation can save a huge amount of time and potential difficulty later. It's also worth checking whether the commitments are cumulative or annual. If you were promised 4 placements over a 3-year contract, do you mean 4 in total or 4 a year? The tender and the contract should make that clear, but where there's any uncertainty, clarify it early during the tender period before submission would be our advice. Good reporting begins with a shared understanding of what success looks like, and for that to work properly, both the supplier and the contracting authority have dual responsibilities. And so social value works best when both sides understand their role. So let's start with the supplier first. The supplier's first responsibility is to deliver the commitments. And I know that sounds obvious, but delivery needs ownership. Someone should know what's been promised and be responsible for coordinating progress. That doesn't mean that one person has to do everything. Social value may involve several teams. HR might support recruitment and apprenticeships. Finance might be tracking local spend. Operations might manage volunteering or environmental actions. Marketing may help capture case studies, etc., etc. But somebody in the organisation needs to bring all of that information together so you can collect that evidence. That might include payroll records, invoices, attendance records, certificates, feedback forms, case studies, carbon data. And the evidence, of course, should be proportionate to the commitments that you make. So there shouldn't need to be a huge administrative or disproportionate burden. But you do need enough to show that the activity happened and what impact it had. Another important supplier responsibility is reporting progress honestly. Don't wait until a commitment has failed before mentioning that there could be a problem. Is something becoming difficult? If it is, raise it early. That gives both sides time to explore solutions. The contracting authority also has responsibilities. It should monitor performance both consistently and fairly. It should be clear about what evidence is required, and it should be clear in the tender what you're required to do. And it should provide feedback, and where appropriate, it should support delivery. For example, the authority might be able to introduce the supplier to local employment organisations or community groups, colleges, or other voluntary sector partners. The buyer shouldn't be expected to deliver the commitment on the supplier's behalf, but it can sometimes help create the connections that make delivery possible. Imagine a supplier is committed to offering work placements but is struggling to recruit suitable participants. A poor supplier-buyer relationship would be to say nothing, report at the end of the year that the placements were not delivered. A better way of handling and managing that would be to raise the issue early with the contract manager, because the authority might be able to connect you with a local college, an employment programme, or a community organisation. The supplier still owns the commitment, but a collaborative conversation may help resolve the problem. The strongest contract relationships aren't based on pretending that everything is perfect. Contract delivery is far from perfect. They are based on transparency, early communication, and joint problem solving. The social value delivery, although it is the supplier's responsibility, successful contract management should feel collaborative rather than adversarial. But let's have a think about what tends to get in the way of successful delivery. The four challenges that you see on this slide are extremely common and they're closely connected. So the first is over-promising at tender stage. We've spoken about this throughout the series. If a supplier promises too much because it believes larger numbers will produce a higher score, once delivery begins, those commitments can soon be unrealistic. And this is especially difficult for smaller organisations because one unexpected staffing change or operational issue can have, we know, a significant impact. So the answer is not to avoid ambition. It is to make commitments that might be stretching but are still credible. The second challenge is that lack of internal ownership. Sometimes the bid writer understands the commitment, but the delivery team does not. And even in smaller business, they might not be the same person. So when the contract starts, the tender response is filed away and nobody's actively managing social value. Months later, the organisation realises that very little has happened, and that's why mobilisation is so important. Bring the people responsible for delivery together, make sure that everyone understands what was promised. The third challenge is poor data collection. So the organisation might actually be delivering lots of social value, but it can't evidence it. Perhaps staff have volunteered, local suppliers have been used, or people have received training, but nobody recorded it. From a customer's perspective, unrecorded activity is very difficult to recognise. So a simple spreadsheet or tracker is often enough. It doesn't have to be a complex task. The fourth challenge is loss of focus. At the beginning of the contract, everyone is enthusiastic and we're really focused and honed in on that new delivery contract. But then operational pressures take over. Social value gets pushed down the list because it doesn't feel urgent. One way to prevent that is to review commitments regularly rather than waiting for formal reporting dates. A short monthly check-in can keep delivery on track, even if your client only wants to hear from you once a year. So, for example, a small supplier commits to 100 volunteering hours over a 2-year contract. The commitment's realistic, but nobody is given responsibility for coordinating it. After 18 months, only 10 hours have been recorded. The problem was not the commitment itself, it was the lack of ownership and tracking. Most social value delivery problems don't arise because suppliers don't care. They arise because social value has not been embedded into normal business processes. So the best way to protect delivery is to make social value part of everyday contract management, not a separate project that people remember occasionally. And the good news is that there are some very practical things that organisations can do to avoid these problems. So having a look at these common challenges, let's turn that around and think about what good delivery looks like. So the first thing is clear responsibility. Someone needs to own the social value commitments. That doesn't mean one person has to personally deliver everything, but there should be someone who knows what's been promised, what's due, and whether progress is on track. For a small organisation, that might be a contract manager, the business owner, an operations lead. For a larger organisation, it might sit across several teams. The important thing is that it doesn't fall between the gaps. And the second point is to embed social value into normal operations. This is really important. Social value isn't a tick box, it's not an add-on. So therefore, it shouldn't sit in a separate document that only gets opened when the customer asks for an update. It should be built into the way the contract is managed. If you committed to local recruitment, include that in your workforce planning. If you've committed to local spend, include it in your purchasing decisions. If you've committed to volunteering, build that into your staff planning. If you've committed to carbon reduction, make sure that the relevant operational data is actually being recorded. The more closely social value is linked to everyday activity, the more likely it is to happen. The third point is about setting realistic and achievable targets. We covered this during the tender session, but it becomes even more important after award. But there is a balance to strike. Commitments should be meaningful and they should also create additional value. But they also need to be deliverable within the size, scope and value of the contract. So a micro business would not be trying to offer the same scale of commitments as a large national organisation. Proportionate, credible commitments are stronger than promises that look impressive but can't be delivered. The next point is to engage with the customer. Don't assume that social value reporting is something that you simply send over at the end of a year. Keep the conversation going. Tell the contract managers what's working well. Share your positive stories. And if there are barriers, raise them early. Ask whether priorities have changed. Sometimes the authority might know about a local initiative or community that needs alignment that perfectly fits with what you have to offer. And finally, review progress regularly. That doesn't mean, or it doesn't need to mean a formal monthly meeting. It could be a simple internal check. What have we delivered? What's still outstanding? What evidence do we have? And what needs attention? That regular review stops social value becoming something that's remembered too late. So, practical example, imagine you've committed to providing 4 employability workshops over the first year. A good delivery approach would be to identify the responsible person, agree the likely dates early, find a suitable local partner, prepare a simple attendance and feedback process, review progress after each session, and capture the outcomes as you go. That's much more manageable than reaching month 11 and trying to deliver all 4 workshops at once. And of course, report on the impact of those workshops. Good social value delivery is rarely about complex systems. It's usually more about clear ownership, regular attention, and good communication. So making social value part of how you run the contract, making sure it's not something that's just a bolt on afterwards, can usually really help social value delivery and impact come to life. Because once those activities have taken place, the next question is, how do we show the difference that they actually made? And so demonstrating impact is probably one of the most important parts of this whole session today, because there is a difference between showing that an activity happened and showing that it made a difference. For example, you might report that you delivered 3 training sessions. That tells me what you did, but it doesn't yet tell me what changed. Did people gain new skills? Did anyone secure work as a result? Did confidence improve? Did a local organisation become more resilient? Did carbon emissions reduce? That's the difference between an output and an outcome. The output are the activities or the numbers. The outcomes are the things that changed or the changes that were created as a result. And both matter. So the output might be 10 people attended a workshop. The outcome might be 8 people reported improved confidence and 2 moved into employment. The strongest evidence usually combines different types of information. The data, because it's useful, it gives us scale, numbers of jobs, hours delivered, people trained, local spend achieved, tons of carbons reduced. But the case studies, they add depth. They help explain what happened and why it matters. So things like testimonials can bring a human voice into the evidence. A short quote from a participant, a community partner, or a service user can make the impact much more real. Before and after information can also be powerful. What was the position at the beginning? What changed by the end? That helps demonstrate progress rather than simply activity. So as an example, instead of reporting, we provided mentoring support to 5 young people, you might say, we provided 6 weeks of mentoring support to 5 young people. 4 completed the full programme, 3 reported increased confidence, and 2 progressed into further training. That tells a much stronger story. Another example might be local supply chain spend. So instead of saying we used local suppliers, you could say we spent 18,500 with 4 businesses based within the borough during the first year of the contract, including 2 micro businesses new to our supply chain. Again, that's much clearer. Evidence doesn't need to be glossy. A simple, accurate record is better than a polished case study that can't be substantiated. It's also worth thinking about consent and confidentiality. If you're using photographs, names, testimonials, individual stories, make sure you have the right permissions and that personal information is handled appropriately. There is also real value in telling the story well. Think about the question, what changed because of the social value activity we delivered? That's at the heart of the impact, not just what you did, not just how many people were involved, but what difference did it make? So the key message here is that the activity tells the buyer what happened, the impact tells the buyer why it mattered. And once you're delivering well, there might also be opportunities to create even more value during the life of the contract. Social value commitments are usually agreed during the tender, you know what you have written, you know what the organisation is looking for, so they are all ready for start of contract. But we know that things change. Communities, organisations, local priorities don't stand still. New needs might emerge. New partnerships might become available. A different opportunity might arise that creates greater impact than the original social value commitment that you put in your tender. That's why social value should not always be treated as completely fixed to a point. The starting point is always to deliver what you promise, but once delivery is ongoing and hopefully on track, you can look for additional opportunities. Perhaps a local college opens a new employability programme. Perhaps a community organisation needs volunteers. Perhaps the authority identifies a new priority around digital inclusion, food poverty, or well-being. Perhaps your own organisation develops a new capability that could benefit the community. These opportunities can strengthen the contract and deepen the impact, and collaboration is often the key. Sometimes smaller organisations can feel they need to deliver every social value activity themselves, but that's not always true. Working with local charities, colleges, community groups, employment organisations, or other suppliers can often make delivery more effective. If you are working with others, you would need to be clear about it in your tender submission. And it can also help to ensure activity is genuinely useful rather than created simply to satisfy a tender commitment. So this slide makes an important point about commitments evolving. There may be genuine reasons why an original commitment becomes difficult or no longer creates the best outcome. For example, you might have planned work placements, but demand is low, or a community partner is no longer available. That doesn't mean that you should simply replace the commitment yourself and assume that that's acceptable. Have a conversation with the contracting authority, explain the issue, suggest an alternative that offers equivalent or better value. Agree the change properly. Flexibility can be really positive, but it does need to be transparent and agreed. So, by example, imagine you're committed to providing 2 school careers sessions. During delivery, the authority tells you that a local employability programme for care leavers has an urgent need for employer support. You might agree to redirect one of the sessions towards that group, and that could in fact create greater impact. But that change should be discussed and recorded with your contract manager. Contract managers are usually really receptive to a supplier that comes forward with a sensible solution rather than one that quietly fails to deliver. So the key message here is you do need to deliver the commitment and stay alert to new opportunities. And if there are any changes or any barriers, talk about them openly and agree any changes as a result. And so before we finish with the series, I'd like to leave you with 3 practical questions to take back. And I'm not going to ask everyone to answer these sessions in the chat or anything today, but what I would encourage you to do is to take them away and think about them honestly. The first question is, how will your organisation make social value commitments actually delivered? How will you make sure that social value commitments are actually delivered? So the sub-questions to that are, who will own them? How will the delivery team know what was promised? How will commitments be reviewed during mobilisation? Will they be included in internal plans, etc.? And the second question is, how will progress be tracked effectively? Do you have a way of tracking progress? Is it simple enough so that it's not a huge administrative burden? Will it record the commitment, the target, the deadline, the owner, and the current position? Excuse me. Where will the evidence be stored? How often will progress be reviewed? And the third question is, how will impact be clearly demonstrated? What data will you collect? Can you capture outcomes as well as activities? Can you build case studies? Could you ask participants or partners for feedback? How will you turn delivery into evidence that is useful both for your customer and for future tenders? And that doesn't have to be a sophisticated system. For many smaller organisations, simple spreadsheet, shared folder, regular reviews are enough. What matters is consistency. So a practical framework that you could create might be a very simple table with 5 columns: commitment, target and timescale, responsible person, current progress, evidence held. That gives you a basic control point for every contract. And you might then add a 6th column for impact or outcome, and that encourages you to think beyond the activity that happened. Across this series, we've moved through the full journey. We've started by recognizing the social value you already create. Then we looked at how to communicate it in a tender submission. We've explored how evaluators might look at scoring it and how to create confidence. And finally, today, we've looked at how to deliver and evidence it after award. The common thread in all of these 4 sessions is credibility. Make commitments that are relevant, make commitments that are realistic, explain how you will deliver them, and then do what you said you would do. And the key message, I think, is that social value works best when it's not just part of something that you've written in a bid even. It's part of how your organisation operates. It's part of your value system. It's part of the difference that you as an organisation want to make. And with that, I'll just give you a quick reminder of the support and the resources that are available to help. In Go for Growth, we are here to try and help. We know that this can often feel overwhelming and it can often feel like a challenge. So there are routes to support, and almost all the support that we deliver is offered free at point of use. You can email us, the support@goforgrowth.co.uk email is by far and away the best email address to use and will elicit the quickest responses. You can email me directly. That is my mobile number and my email address on there as well. We also have a bookable calendar. So actually, if you would just like to speak to a human via Teams about something, you can book a 30-minute Teams session through our bookable calendar. And we have lots of events going on throughout the year. We're just going into our summer recess for events. But if you keep an eye on our Eventbrite or our website, our autumn and winter events will be posted as we start in September. We also, Cheshire West and Chester, have got a free self-paced online study course on social value, which you can go through, and you can request a certificate of completion at the end. And that will give you evidence of continued professional development. You can keep an eye on our social media. And we also have something called a public sector supply ready health check, which is free of charge. And if you're wondering, I don't know what I don't know how ready I am for all of this stuff, you can take that health check and it will help you understand where you're at. And also it will help give you some support and guidance if you do find that there are things that you need to improve on or learn about to be ready to take part in public sector opportunities. So please feel free to access any or all of those support offers there. All of those things are free at point of use. So that's everything from me today. I want to finish by saying thank you ever so much to everyone who's attended, not just today, but any part of the series. I know that as founders, micro business owners, small business owners, sole traders, voluntary sector organisations, time is a premium. And so we hope that it has been useful in joining any or all of the sessions over the last 4 weeks. I can't see any questions in the Q&A or the chat today, but if anybody has got anything, please feel free to drop us an email and either I or a member of the Go for Growth team will help as much as we can. We will get the slides and the recording out later this week. Please do get in touch if we can be of any use. And if there's nothing else, thank you again for your attendance. And we hope to see you on another Go for Growth event sometime soon. Thank you ever so much. Have a good rest of your Tuesday.